The morning sun cast long shadows across the airport tarmac as Captain Andrew Taylor pulled his car into the employee parking lot. The clock on his dashboard showed 5:15 a.m., almost 2 hours before his scheduled flight to London. Being early wasn't just a habit for Andrew, it was part of what made him one of the best pilots at Celestial Airways. Andrew adjusted his perfectly pressed uniform in the rearview mirror, straightening the 4 gold stripes on his sleeves that represented 20 years of hard work and dedication. His reflection showed a face weathered by countless flights across every time zone, yet his eyes still held the same excitement for flying they had when he earned his wings. Another day in the skies, he whispered to himself, a ritual he kept since his first solo flight. The employee lot was nearly empty this early. Only the most dedicated crew members and maintenance staff arrived before dawn. Andrew liked it this way. The quiet gave him time to mentally prepare for the day ahead. Flight 372 to London was carrying over 300 passengers, and each one was counting on him, even if they didn't know his name. Andrew grabbed his flight bag and pilot's cap from the passenger seat. The bag contained his personal checklist, one he'd developed over years of flying everything from small training aircraft to military transport planes during his Air Force career and now commercial airliners. The official checklists were in the cockpit, but Andrew believed in being doubly prepared. As he walked through the quiet parking lot, memories from his journey to becoming a captain played through his mind. The countless nights studying flight manuals while his college friends went to parties. The extra flying lessons he paid for by working 2 jobs. The military service that had honed his skills during tense situations. The disappointment of being passed over for promotions early in his commercial career despite having more flight hours than his colleagues. But he had persevered. Now, at age 45, he was one of the most respected pilots in the company, or at least, that's what his record showed. With over 15,000 flight hours and a perfect safety record, Andrew's professional achievements spoke for themselves. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife, "Fly safe. Love you to the moon and back." She had been his rock through everything. The long separations, the missed birthdays, the times when he questioned if he ever break through the invisible barriers that seemed to exist only for pilots who looked like him. Andrew texted back a quick "love you more" and slipped the phone into his pocket. He took a deep breath of the cool morning air, filling his lungs with determination. Today's flight was particularly important. The CEO of a major tech company would be among the passengers, and the airline had emphasized giving him a smooth experience. The international terminal loomed ahead, its glass walls reflecting the orange and pink sunrise. Andrew had flown this London route dozens of times. He knew the wind patterns, the communication protocols with air traffic control over the Atlantic, and exactly how much coffee he'd need to stay sharp during the 8-hour journey. Other crew members would be arriving soon. First Officer Lee would be co-piloting today, a promising young pilot who Andrew had taken under his wing. The flight attendants would be gathering in the crew lounge, reviewing the passenger manifest and any special requirements. But first, Andrew wanted to complete his personal pre-flight ritual. 30 minutes of reviewing the route, weather patterns, and any technical updates for the Boeing 787 Dreamliner they'd be flying today. It was this attention to detail that had earned him the nickname the Professor among younger pilots. Andrew approached the staff entrance, ID badge already in hand. His mind was running through fuel calculations and weather reports. The plane was waiting, and soon the skies would be calling him home again. Little did he know that before he even reached the cockpit, he would face a challenge no flight school had prepared him for, one that would ultimately change not just his career, but an entire airline. Andrew approached the staff entrance of Celestial Airways with the confident stride of someone who belonged there. The glass doors with the company logo slid open as other early morning staff members walked through. The security checkpoint just inside was standard procedure, a quick badge scan, sometimes a friendly nod from the security personnel who recognized the regular crew members. But today was different. A security guard Andrew had never seen before stood at the checkpoint. The man was perhaps in his mid-30s, with closely cropped hair and a uniform that looked like it had been pressed just minutes ago. "Morning," Andrew said with a polite smile, holding up his ID badge with its captain's credentials clearly visible. His 4 gold stripes on his uniform sleeves caught the fluorescent lighting of the hallway. The security guard glanced at the badge, then at Andra, then back at the badge. His expression shifted slightly. "I'll need you to wait outside while I verify this," the guard said, his voice flat. Andra blinked, momentarily confused. "I'm sorry." "Just step outside and wait, please," the guard repeated, gesturing toward the door Andra had just entered through. Andra remained calm, though he felt a familiar tightness forming in his chest. He'd encountered this before, the skepticism, the extra scrutiny. But not here, not at the airline where he'd worked for 15 years. "I'm the captain for Flight 372 to London," Andrew explained, keeping his voice even. "We board in 90 minutes, and I need to begin my pre-flight checks." As they spoke, 2 flight attendants approached the checkpoint. The guard barely glanced at their badges before waving them through with a smile. Then a co-pilot Andrew recognized from another international flight showed his credentials and was immediately cleared. None of them were asked to wait outside. None of them looked like Andrew. "I understand, but you'll still need to wait for proper clearance," the guard insisted, avoiding eye contact now. Andrew took a deep breath. He could feel his heartbeat quickening, not from fear, but from a quiet, simmering frustration. He'd faced this too many times before, in flight school, at military bases, at other airlines. The unspoken question hanging in the air: do you really belong here? "May I ask what specific verification you need?" Andrew asked, still professional despite the growing knot in his stomach. "My badge has the same security features as the others you just let through." The guard shifted uncomfortably. "It's just procedure." "A procedure that only applies to me?" Andrew asked quietly. Other crew members were starting to notice the exchange. Some walked by quickly, avoiding involvement. Others slowed down, watching with concerned expressions. First Officer Lee, who was scheduled to co-pilot with Andrew, approached the checkpoint. He showed his badge, a more junior version with fewer credentials than Andrew's, and the guard moved to let him through. Lee hesitated, looking from Andrew to the guard. "Is there a problem?" "This is Captain Taylor, my commanding officer for today's London flight." The guard seemed increasingly uncomfortable. "I'm just following orders." "He needs to wait outside for additional verification." "From whom?" Lee asked. "From management," the guard replied vaguely. Andrew stood there, still holding his badge, aware that every passing minute was eating into his preparation time. The London flight was important, not just because of the VIP passenger, but because every flight deserved his complete attention and preparation. Outside, the sun had fully risen. Inside, time seemed suspended in this moment of quiet indignity. Andrew had options. He could force his way through. He could call his supervisor. He could make a scene. Instead, he did something unexpected. He smiled slightly, stepped back and said, "I'll wait, but I'd like your name and badge number, please, for the record." Something in his calm, measured tone made the guard look directly at him for the first time. What the guard saw wasn't anger or defeat. It was determination. And perhaps that was more unsettling than anything else. 20 minutes passed with Andrew standing outside the staff entrance. The morning rush had begun in earnest now, with crew members hurrying in for their shifts. Some glanced at him curiously, a captain in full uniform waiting outside like a visitor who'd forgotten his pass. Others walked by without noticing, too focused on their own morning routines. Andrew checked his watch again. The extra time he'd built into his schedule was disappearing. He'd already texted the flight operations office to let them know about the delay, keeping his message professional and brief. No complaints, just facts. A flight attendant named Tara approached the entrance. She'd flown with Andrew several times and recognized him immediately. "Captain Taylor? What are you doing out here?" she asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "Apparently, my credentials need special verification today," Andrew replied, keeping his tone light despite the heaviness he felt inside. Tara frowned. "That's ridiculous. Let me talk to someone." Before Andrew could respond, she had disappeared through the doors, badge in hand. The security guard barely glanced at her as she passed. Andrew took a deep breath of the cool morning air. In 20 years of flying, he'd learned that altitude gave you perspective. Up in the sky, at 38,000 feet, problems often looked smaller. But this problem, this feeling of being seen as somehow less qualified, less trustworthy, less belonging, never shrank no matter how high he flew. His phone buzzed. A text from First Officer Lee. "CUO Henderson is coming down." Tara told him what happened. 5 minutes later, Chief Operations Officer Henderson burst through the doors, his face flushed with what looked like a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "Captain Taylor, please come in immediately." "I can't apologize enough for this misunderstanding." Andrew nodded and followed Henderson inside. The security guard was nowhere to be seen. "I've been standing here for nearly half an hour," Andrew said quietly as they walked past the checkpoint. "That's 30 minutes less preparation time for a flight with over 300 people on board." Henderson looked pained. "This shouldn't have happened. The guard is new, but that's no excuse." "No, it's not," Andrew agreed, especially since he let everyone else through without question. They reached the crew lounge where several staff members were gathered, including Tara and Lee. The room fell quiet as they entered. "I need to get to my pre-flight checks," Andrew said, ready to move past this and focus on his job. "Of course," Henderson nodded. "But first, I want you to know this will be addressed immediately." As Andrew moved toward the door, a maintenance engineer named Powell stepped forward. "It happened to me too," Powell said, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 days ago, same guard." Andrew stopped. Something in Powell's tone made him turn around. "And to me last week," added a flight attendant in the corner. "Though I was told to use the service entrance, not wait outside." The room grew uncomfortably quiet as gazes shifted between them. All three were black employees. Andrew felt his perspective shifting, like when turbulence suddenly changes a smooth flight. This wasn't just about him or a single guard's bias. It was a pattern. "Has anyone reported these incidents?" he asked, looking around the room. Hesitant glances were exchanged. Powell finally spoke up. "I mentioned it to my supervisor. He said it would be taken care of." "I didn't say anything," the flight attendant admitted. "I've only been here 8 months. Didn't want to make waves." Andrew understood their silence. In an industry where teamwork was essential and recommendations meant everything, being labeled difficult could ground a career faster than a mechanical failure could ground a plane. Henderson was shifting uncomfortably now. "I had no idea this was happening multiple times. I assure you." "With all due respect," Andrew interrupted gently, "assurances aren't enough anymore." He looked at his watch again. His flight would be boarding soon, and nothing was more important than the safety of his passengers. But as he headed toward the door, he knew this situation wouldn't end here. "I need to prepare for my flight now," he said firmly. "But when I return from London, we're going to have a longer conversation about this. All of us." As he walked toward the flight deck, his mind was already formulating a plan, not just for himself, but for Powell, for the flight attendant, and for everyone else who might have been told to wait outside, while others walked freely through the door. The London flight went smoothly despite the morning's events. Andrew maintained his focus in the cockpit, as he always did. Passengers never knew about the storm brewing inside him. They only felt the gentle landing and heard his calm voice thanking them for flying Celestial Airways. But during the return flight and in the days that followed, Andrew's mind kept returning to what had happened. The faces of Powell and the flight attendant stayed with him, along with their stories. How many others had similar experiences they'd never shared? "You seem quieter than usual," his wife commented over dinner 3 days after his return. "Everything okay?" Andrew set down his fork. "Remember what happened to me at Regional Airways, when they kept passing me up for international routes?" She nodded, her expression showing she understood immediately. "It's happening at Celestial too." "Yes," he said simply. "But this time, I'm going to do something about it, not just for me." The next morning, Andrew came to work with a small notebook. After completing his flight to Dallas, he stayed in the crew lounge instead of heading home. He approached a few colleagues he trusted, starting conversations that began casually but soon turned serious. "Has anything like that ever happened to you?" he asked carefully after sharing his own experience. Some looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. Others lowered their voices and shared stories about being questioned in areas where white colleagues moved freely, about comments on their attitude when they spoke up about problems, about promotions that went to less experienced pilots. "I never told anyone," a ground crew supervisor named Lewis confided. Who would believe me over management? I need this job. Each conversation revealed more threads of the same pattern. Andrew wrote everything down: dates, times, names, incidents. He wasn't just collecting complaints, he was building a case. By the end of the week, Andrew had spoken with 23 employees across different departments. 17 had stories of their own. Some were subtle, being left off email chains or social gatherings. Others were blatant, like the security guard incident. Andrew stayed up late at his kitchen table, organizing his notes. His wife brought him tea around midnight. "What exactly are you planning to do with all this?" she asked, concern in her voice. "Something that can't be ignored," he replied. "Something that will make real change." The following Tuesday, Andrew met Powell for coffee near the airport. The maintenance engineer seemed nervous, glancing around as if worried about being seen. "I've been keeping track of things," Andrew explained, showing him the organized notes, all names removed for privacy. "And I'm not the only one who's been doing this." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts from 2 other longtime employees who'd been quietly documenting similar incidents for years. They'd heard what Andrew was doing and trusted him with their records. "There's a pattern here," Andrew continued. "Not just random bad experiences. Look at the hiring numbers I got from HR." The spreadsheet showed a clear picture. Minority candidates were hired at much lower rates than equally qualified white applicants. Those who were hired advanced more slowly. The turnover rate for minority employees was almost double that of their white counterparts. Powell's eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. "This is systematic." Andrew nodded. "And that's why individual complaints never change anything. The system is designed to treat each case as isolated, as a misunderstanding. But when you put it all together..." "So what do we do?" Powell asked. "We're not filing a complaint," Andrew said firmly. "We're presenting a case with solutions. I've been researching what other airlines have done successfully. Companies that have actual diversity programs, not just talk." He showed Powell another document, a draft proposal for procedural changes that would address the problems directly. It included everything from revised hiring practices to accountability measures for managers to mentorship programs. "This is big," Powell said, a hint of worry in his voice. "Management might not like being shown these problems." "Probably not," Andrew agreed. "But I'm not interested in whether they like it. I'm interested in fixing it." As they talked, Andrew's phone buzzed with a text from a colleague in scheduling. The message was brief but clear. "Heads up. They're changing your flight assignments next month. Less international, more regional." Andrew showed Powell the message. "They've heard I'm talking to people. They're already trying to send a message back." Powell looked alarmed. "Maybe we should wait, be more careful." Andrew shook his head. "No more waiting. No more being careful. That's what they count on, that we'll be too afraid to rock the boat." He closed his notebook with a decisive snap. "By this time next week, every member of the board will have a copy of this report. And they'll either be part of the solution or part of the problem that everyone will know about." The boardroom of Celestial Airways occupied the entire top floor of their headquarters, with windows overlooking the runways where planes took off and landed in perfect sequence. Andrew had never been invited here before. Pilots, even senior ones, rarely were. But today was different. Andrew arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in his full captain's uniform. With him was his longtime friend Thomas, an aviation attorney he'd known since his Air Force days. They sat in the waiting area, watching board members filter in, men and women in expensive suits, carrying leather portfolios and coffee cups. "You sure about this?" Thomas asked quietly. "Once we walk in there, there's no turning back." Andrew nodded. "I've been turning back for 20 years. Not today." When they entered the boardroom, the conversation died immediately. 12 faces turned toward them with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed annoyance. "Captain Taylor," the board chairman, Wilson, said stiffly, "we've set aside 30 minutes for your concerns." "Thank you for your time," Andrew replied, his voice steady as he placed copies of his report in front of each board member. The document was impressively thick, nearly 50 pages of carefully organized evidence, testimonials, and statistics. "What exactly are we looking at?" asked one woman, flipping through the pages with a frown. A comprehensive analysis of discriminatory practices at Celestial Airways, Andrew said simply, along with proposed solutions. The room temperature seemed to drop by 10 degrees. That's a serious accusation, Wilson said, his voice tight. It's not an accusation, it's documented fact, Andrew replied. He remained standing, his posture straight as he'd been taught in flight school. Page 3 shows the hiring disparities. Page 12 details incidents of differential treatment. Page 28 begins the section on promotion inequalities. As board members reluctantly began scanning the documents, Andrew continued, "But I'm not here to simply highlight problems. The last 15 pages contain specific, actionable solutions that have worked at other airlines and in other industries." He hadn't raised his voice or shown anger, but the power of his calm delivery made everyone in the room pay attention. "I've also taken the liberty of sharing this information with the Aviation Equality Commission," Andrew added. Several board members exchanged alarmed glances. The AEC was a regulatory body with real power. Power that could affect routes, licenses, and government contracts. "That seems premature," said Wilson sharply. "This should have been handled internally first." Andrew raised an eyebrow. "Like when Powell reported discrimination to his supervisor, or when I was made to wait outside while white colleagues walked freely past. Those internal channels seemed to be broken." A younger board member named Chen spoke up. "I'd like time to properly review this information. Some of these numbers are concerning." "Of course," Andrew agreed. "But I should mention that the AEC has given Celestial Airways exactly 1 week to respond with a plan of action." The atmosphere in the room shifted from dismissive to anxious. Andrew could see it in their faces. This wasn't going away with vague promises or a token gesture. "What exactly are you hoping to achieve here, Captain Taylor?" asked Wilson, his tone now more cautious. Andrew took a moment before answering. This wasn't about revenge or personal vindication. It never had been. "I want Celestial Airways to be the company it claims to be in its mission statement," he said finally. "A place where excellence is the only qualification that matters. Where every employee is judged by their performance, not their appearance. Where a pilot with 20 years of experience doesn't have to prove he belongs every time a new security guard is hired." He turned a page in the report to a section highlighted in yellow. "These proposed changes would make Celestial a leader in the industry. This isn't just about doing what's right, though that should be enough. It's also good business." Thomas then outlined the legal perspective, explaining calmly how the changes would protect the airline from potential lawsuits while improving workforce retention and morale. As the presentation continued, Andrew noticed a shift in the room. Not everyone was convinced, he could tell from their body language, but they were listening. Really listening, perhaps for the first time. "We'll need time to review all this and discuss it as a board," Wilson said finally, his tone non-committal. Andrew nodded. "Of course. But know that this report represents just the beginning. 17 current employees have provided statements. If needed, they're prepared to speak publicly." The implied message was clear. This wouldn't stay in the boardroom if they tried to bury it. As Andrew and Thomas gathered their materials to leave, the board member named Chen approached them. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "some of us have suspected these issues existed. We just didn't have the data or the courage to address them properly. Thank you for that." Andrew nodded but said nothing. Thanks wouldn't change systems. Actions would. As he left the building and stepped into the sunlight, his phone buzzed with messages from Powell and others who had contributed to the report. They were all asking the same question: how did it go? Andrew texted back one sentence: "They're listening now." Whether they would act was another question entirely. But Andrew had spent his career calculating risks and preparing for turbulence. This was just one more flight plan, and he was prepared for whatever weather lay ahead. 3 days passed with no official response from the board. Andrew continued his regular flight schedule, though he noticed subtle changes. His colleagues treated him differently, some with newfound respect, others with careful distance. Word had spread through the airline's grapevine about his meeting with the board. Andrew was in the crew lounge preparing for an afternoon flight to Chicago when his phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Thomas, his attorney friend. "They're stalling," Thomas said without preamble. I just heard from my contact at Celestial's legal department. They're planning to form a committee to investigate the issues you raised. Andrew sighed. He knew what that meant. Committees meant delays, watered-down recommendations, and eventually forgotten promises. How long are they planning to stretch this out? He asked, watching the rain start to patter against the lounge windows. 6 months minimum. They're hoping the AEC will accept the formation of a committee as meaningful action and back off. Andrew thanked his friend and hung up. He sat for a long moment, thinking. This was exactly what he'd expected, and exactly what he'd prepared for. He pulled out his pilot's logbook, the small leather-bound book where he recorded every flight, every hour in the air. Every pilot kept one. In the back of his, tucked between the pages, was a folded sheet of paper he'd never had to use in his 20 years of flying. It was Section 47.3 of the pilot's union contract, the safety-related work stoppage clause. It allowed pilots to refuse to fly if they believed there was a safety concern that hadn't been properly addressed. Most people thought of safety in terms of mechanical issues or weather conditions, but Andrew had studied the contract carefully. The clause specifically included crew communication and cooperation as safety elements. He checked his watch. It was time for a decision. He dialed Powell first, then 5 other pilots who had contributed to his report. Each call was brief but to the point. The board is stalling, he told them. I'm invoking Section 47.3 on my Chicago flight. Crew communication has been compromised by systemic bias. I can't guarantee passenger safety under these conditions. There was silence on each call. What Andrew was suggesting was unprecedented. Are you sure about this? Powell asked. They'll say you're overreaching. I've documented how biased treatment affects crew coordination, Andrew replied. The link to safety is clear. The question is, are you with me? By the time Andrew walked to his gate, his phone was buzzing constantly. Word was spreading fast. 3 other captains had already invoked the same clause for their flights. The gate agent looked up in confusion when Andrew approached. Captain, your co-pilot just called in. Says he's invoking some safety clause. So am I, Andrew said calmly. This flight is delayed indefinitely due to safety concerns under Section 47.3. The agent's eyes widened. But what do I tell the passengers? Tell them the truth. The pilots have safety concerns that need to be addressed before we can fly. As Andrew stood at the gate, his phone buzzed again. It was a text from a pilot in Denver. I'm in. Section 47.3. Then another from Miami. Another from Seattle. Within an hour, 17 flights had been grounded across the country. By mid-afternoon, the number had grown to 35. Andrew was called to an emergency meeting with Henderson, the chief operations officer, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Do you understand what you're doing? Henderson asked, his voice strained. We have thousands of stranded passengers. I understand exactly what I'm doing, Andrew replied, and so do the other 63 pilots who have now invoked the safety clause. Henderson's face paled. 63? And growing by the hour. Both minority pilots and white pilots who've seen the evidence. This isn't a minority issue, Mr. Henderson. It's a company issue. The COO slumped in his chair. The board thinks you're bluffing. That you can't possibly get enough pilots to ground the entire airline. Check the flight boards, Andrew suggested. We're already at 40% of flights. By tomorrow morning, it will be closer to 80. His phone buzzed again. Another pilot joining the work stoppage. What exactly do you want? Henderson asked finally. Exactly what was in my report. No committees, no delays, real changes starting now. The rest of the day became a blur of calls, texts, and impromptu meetings. News outlets picked up the story by evening. Major airline grounds flights over discrimination claims read the headlines. Social media erupted with passenger complaints, but also with support when the reason for the stoppage became clear. Former employees began sharing their own stories online, creating a wave of public pressure. By midnight, more than 200 pilots had joined the action. Celestial Airways had been forced to cancel over 60% of its flights, with more cancellations scheduled for the morning. The financial impact was immediate and severe. The company's stock plummeted in after-hours trading. Conservative estimates put the losses at millions of dollars per hour. Just before dawn, Andrew's phone rang. It was Wilson, the board chairman. "You've made your point, Captain Taylor," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "The board has called an emergency session for 8 a.m. "I'll be there," Andrew replied. As he hung up, he looked out his window at the faint light of dawn breaking over the horizon. In all his years of flying, he'd never seen anything as beautiful as the power of people standing together for what was right. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m., but Andrew arrived at 7:30, finding the boardroom already filled with tense faces. The atmosphere was electric with urgency, a stark contrast to the dismissive tone of their previous meeting. This time, Andrew wasn't alone. With him were Powell, First Officer Lee, and representatives from the pilots' union. Television news vans lined the street outside the headquarters. Overnight, the story had exploded across the nation. 286 flights grounded, Wilson stated flatly as they took their seats. The board chairman's voice was hoarse, likely from hours of crisis calls. "Our stock has dropped 18%. We have thousands of stranded passengers, all because you were asked to wait outside." Andrew shook his head. "Not because I was asked to wait outside, because that incident was just the visible tip of a much larger problem. One that affects safety, morale, and the culture of this entire airline." The boardroom doors opened and the airline's CEO walked in. A rare appearance at these meetings. Her expression was grim but determined. "I've reviewed your report and recommendations," she said, nodding to Andrew. "Along with the data on today's work stoppage. The pilots invoking the safety clause represent over 60% of our workforce, both minority and white pilots." A heavy silence fell over the room. The implications were clear. This wasn't going away. "We have a choice," the CEO continued. "We can fight this, drag it through courts and PR battles for years. Or we can acknowledge that Captain Taylor's report has identified real problems that need real solutions." Wilson began to object, but she raised her hand to silence him. "The board can vote however it chooses, but as CEO, I'm implementing Captain Taylor's recommended changes effective immediately." A murmur ran through the room. Andrew kept his expression neutral, but inside, he felt a weight lifting that he'd carried for decades. The CEO turned to face him directly. "Captain, if your pilots return to work today, I give you my personal guarantee that every recommendation in your report will be fully implemented. Not studied, not considered. Implemented." Andrew looked at his colleagues, who nodded slightly. "We need that in writing, with specific timelines and accountability measures." "You'll have it within the hour," she promised. By noon, pilots across the country were returning to their flights. Passengers who had been angry about delays began to understand as the story spread through news reports and social media. Many expressed support, some even applauding crews as they boarded. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. True to her word, the CEO began implementing changes immediately. A complete overhaul of the security protocols with new training focused on eliminating bias. A diversity oversight committee with actual power to review hiring, promotion, and workplace culture issues. Transparent tracking of advancement opportunities to ensure qualified minority employees weren't being overlooked. Mandatory company-wide training on recognizing and addressing unconscious bias. Financial compensation for employees who had experienced documented discrimination. Most importantly, regular assessment of these measures with public reporting of the results. 3 months later, Andrew sat in a different meeting room, leading a session with new pilot recruits. The room was more diverse than any training class in the airline's history. "The skies don't care what you look like," he told them. "Up there, all that matters is skill, judgment, and teamwork. Now our company operates the same way." After the session, Powell caught up with him in the hallway. "Have you seen the industry newsletter? 3 other airlines are adopting our new policies." Andrew smiled. "It's a start." 6 months to the day after being told to wait outside, Andrew received a call from the CEO's office. He was being promoted to the executive leadership team with a new title, Chief Officer of Operational Culture. His first task would be expanding the successful changes throughout all departments of the airline and helping develop industry-wide standards for other carriers. That evening, as he drove home, Andrew passed the same security entrance where he'd been stopped months earlier. The guard who had turned him away was long gone. In his place was a new team, diverse in every way, who had been trained to treat everyone with the same respect and professionalism. A text message came through from his wife. "Have you seen the news? Celestial's stock is at an all-time high." Andrew smiled as he typed his response. Turns out doing the right thing is good business after all. As he pulled into his driveway, he thought about the journey from that morning when he'd been told to wait outside. One incident that could have been ignored, brushed aside, accepted as just the way things are. Instead, it had become the catalyst for transformation, not just for him, but for an entire company and potentially an industry. He looked up at the clear evening sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. For 20 years, he had navigated aircraft through storms and darkness, always finding the way home. Now he had helped navigate something even more important: change. And like the best flights, the journey had been turbulent but ultimately successful, arriving exactly where it needed to be.